good catch there, Jamie. So just to restate my question here, since the recording started, we're talking about maintaining previous versions of OKD and kind of the community's response to that. And I just had a question, or I guess maybe a point about, even if we're able to have the knowledge to support previous versions, our ability to take community input back to those versions might be very limited. I know OCP, the product, has its own rules about like how backports will be accepted and what types of content is acceptable for backports. And then more to the point, creating a bug against the current version is something I think we're just kind of getting into as a community. So this kind of adds an extra layer to it. So I think if we get into a discussion about like how would we support previous versions, I think that necessarily we should talk about this community's ability to actually like, fix things or make changes in the upstream as it looks right now. That was my only point, I guess.
I think that's a good point. I think really the community has spoken in terms of the number of volunteers that we have at this time and the infrastructure, right? So I think we're at a point where we can't do anything right now, even if we wanted to. So it's sort of, that answers that question. I think. I don't know. What do other folks think?
Yeah, I'm in agreement. We don't have too many hands on deck.
I think this was also the conclusion from the last time we discussed this like 3 or 4 meetings ago, and that it's also fine because it's just a community run project and we don't need to do LTS releases or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that for that to change, we sort of need to get it to where the community can fairly easily build the various releases.
We need to be able to run end-to-ends.
Right, because otherwise it's really hard to test a backport. So, and we can't leave it to Vadim to do all of that. So yeah, I'd see that as a precondition.
Well, and that's not to say that it isn't a goal, all right? Like obviously we want to continue to grow the project and have that be the reality moving forward, is that we can get enough community support to patch things in previous versions. It's just not there right now. All right, any other thoughts on this aspect? So what are we saying we want to do moving forward to answer Vadim's question? Do we want to find out first do the research and find out if this build would be upgradable, and then have a discussion maybe on the Google chat about the Google discussion email list about next steps once we get some clarity? Does that sound like a plan?
Well, I don't see any real reason to rush into it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because probably people who would be testing or upgrading this soon, they will also be pretty happy just to take the nightly builds.
Right. I guess that's true at this point. Yeah. So, what do folks think? Do we just generally wait for a while, or do we try to get an immediate answer and do something in the shorter term?
Well,
what are folks thinking?
I would like the research by Luigi on whether the Colin Walters issue is resolved in this release. I just didn't want to do a big promotion, everybody try and give us your feedback on something that we didn't really want people doing that. I don't think it should stop the release. I think it just stops the blog post, basically. That's my opinion. But and I just wanted a ping, which is why I showed up today, if something was going to come out this week, so that I could work on the draft of the blog post.
Okay, well, let's do this. Luigi, can you find the answer to that question about upgradability and then post it in the Google discussion group, and then we'll decide where to go from there based on that. And you know, I think that's a pivotal question, you know, at this point.
Absolutely. No, we will do so. And then I think the other thing is, if we go forward with the 412 OKD 412 stable, And actually also the 413 sort of dev cut for, because this is what the OpenShift team really wanted, was that we on a sprintly basis have a release of the dev every 3 weeks. Basically, we're doing our sprints, and they were really keen to get feedback from you guys. So I think the whole issue is about signals for OCP at the end of the day. So it's a very Red Hat selfish thing, but at the same time, it will help them and also help the community at large, really. So if there's anything that goes wrong, we'd really like feedback. And so what we'll do as a team, because we've been sort of asked to handle the release process, is gather this feedback and feed it back to the OCP, sorry, the larger OpenShift community within Red Hat. So it really helps. So the feedback is the big thing. And so I really would like to encourage you guys to give us feedback, no matter how bad, if it's good. That feedback would be really appreciated. So they just asked me to bring it up. So yes, I would.
Excellent. That's a good point, that getting that feedback upstream, as it were, will help the community and help Red Hat, who, butters our bread, so to speak, in a lot of ways. So, all right, well then let's get the research information, and then we'll move forward from that. We do not have well actually, let's so SCOS updates. Anything specific to SCOS?
No, we don't have Timothy here. He would have some updates.
Yeah, I will say this, is I noticed two people asking in, one person in the discussion section of the repo, and one person in Slack asking about using it separately, just as a separate OS to play around with. So Glenn, was it Macy, and then someone else asked in the GitLab discussions about or GitHub discussions about that. So that might be something that is it in our documentation anywhere yet? Is it in that sort of write-up that was done a couple months ago by Christian et al. About this project? Was there anything mentioned in there about it being standalone, usable as a standalone OS or not? I know that in the meetings there was discussion about it really wouldn't be a focus on that, but it might be good if we answer that question to folks, because it is starting to come from the community. People want to play with it just like they play with FCOS. So
I think we talked about this months and months ago when we first started talking about SCOS. And I think we discussed creating some in the FAQ information about that you can use it standalone, and maybe being able to create some, a link for people to download it separately on somewhere on OKD.io, which I think would be very nice for the CentOS Stream community and the team to get feedback on that. I'm not sure what the product teams all think about that, but I think it's a really good idea to get that feedback and get it more stable and strengthened, and maybe get a few more eyeballs and participants in the CentOS Stream Cloud SIG as well, because that's mostly Red Hatters anyways. So I would be a strong proponent of creating even just a small landing page somewhere, the FAQ, and something that links to a way to download the thing and give feedback on it. I know that's a big chunk of work. But with the other thing, I don't know if Luigi mentioned it in the last call, but Flatcar is going for incubation in the CNCF. Flatcar is another container Linux. I'm not sure how. I've been trying to look for stats on how widely adopted it is, but there's other alternatives to FCOS, SCOS, and RCOS, and so It'd be interesting to see what the adoption is for a flat car versus all of the asterisk causes that we have. And I've been looking for a way to get those numbers, but I haven't been able to find one. So if anybody has any clues about adoption of the other container Linux, or saw any white papers float by, or blog posts about people's adoption of those, I'd love to know a breakdown of the different container Linuxes out there. And I haven't seen anybody do anything that I would call credible, other than like surveys of 28 people who use Flatcar. That's the only thing I could find the other day. So I know more than 28 people use Flatcar. So I just can't find any numbers.
All right. To your first point, I will bring it to the community development group meeting next week for someone to take the task of writing a landing page and at the very least an FAQ with a link to download the SCOS, and then we'll go from there. Maybe start with the repo FAQ, the FAQ item linking to maybe something in the repo that's just a single page with some info and whatnot. And any other thoughts on that, on SCOS in general?
So Jamie, let me also follow up on that. If you could just keep it as an action item for me, I will get to chat to Timothy and the guys about if SCOS can be used standalone. So
okay, let me add that to the to-do items on. Let's see. All right, I'll create an item for you in the working group repo. I'll create a or sorry, in the
yeah, I know what you
board,
mean.
right?
Yeah.
The thing about doohickey, whatchamacallit.
Yeah.
All right. All right, anything else on SCOS before we move on? FCOS updates. It doesn't look like anyone is here. And let me do a quick scan to see. Hold on one second. I'm gonna ping Dusty real quick just to see. Maybe.
While you're doing that, is the FCOS release currently at the same release number of OCP as SCOS? So are they matching right now?
Sorry, say that one more time, Diane.
So the FCOS and SCOS, are they in sync in terms of release numbers?
In
Just
terms
different-
of release numbers, like
Yeah.
33, 34, etc. I don't know. Luigi, do you know?
Just wondering.
Between for FCOS and SCOS.
Yeah.
Well, I just know we had a chat about SCOS. SCOS is just there's no versioning. They have a master branch, and that's it. Timothy wasn't happy about having versioning, so by the virtue of the fact that SCOS doesn't have versioning, I think
Yeah, no.
might mean it doesn't have this.
Okay, well, we can ask Timothy offline. I was just thinking in the blog post if they were in sync,
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
that'd be something we want to mention. But if they're not, then we want to mention that too. So
All right, Timothy can't join. I asked him if there's anything worth mentioning and for FCOS. Let's go ahead and that's, I think, actually, let me back up a little bit. I feel like that lack of versioning is probably something that we're going to get a lot of questions on. So let's create a task item for that as well, for adding that to the FAQ. Because invariably we will get asked, what version of Fedora is this based on? What version goes with this OKD version, etc. So let's create a task for that as well. All right, okay, so Dusty and Timothy do not have anything. Hold on, is there? Okay. Moving on, community development updates. Brian is out this meeting and possibly the next meeting as well. Community updates, we do have the email situation resolved, and we just need to send in the aliases that we want. And so the 5 aliases that the community came up with, it's like communications, contact, and there's basically 5 aliases. Those will all go to the Gmail account. That's the same one that's the sign up for the Twitter, and it's used in a couple of other places for the time being. And then that will probably eventually break off into separate email accounts as needed for different functionality. Other things that we talked about are, we spent a lot of time talking about getting clarity on operators and getting clarity on ARM support, both of which we will talk about later in this meeting. And I'm trying to think if there's anything that I'm missing here. Let me take a quick look. I forgot that Brian was not going to be here today. Let's see. I'm still working on a Tecton installation document. Charo had one from a couple of years ago, so I'm sort of looking at what he has and comparing it with what I have. Social media, the general consensus is that we're going to try Mastodon, and Elmiko's has created a document that is very helpful. I'll link to it here just so that folks have it. I'll put it in the chat. This was like super helpful, and this sort of sets the stage for us to at least try Mastodon. So we're going to give it a shot and just see how things go in terms of communicating out. The phenomenon is that a lot of people are moving from Twitter to Mastodon, or at least doing both. Anecdotal evidence that I've read from people who are in both is that there's more engagement on Mastodon because it's more sort of focused communities. And so some of the servers that we would be on, actually, Elmiko, why don't you go ahead and just summarize what you said at the community development meeting?
Yeah, sure, if I can remember it all. You know, like for I guess folks watching at home and whatnot, you know, the main difference between Twitter and Mastodon is that Twitter is a centralized service, whereas Mastodon is a decentralized service. So you know, in the case of Mastodon, what Jamie's talking about with the different servers, which are, you know, pretty commonly called instances in the community. Each instance is controlled by a different group, maybe has different codes of conduct, different rules. And so, you know, we could align ourselves with kind of an open source instance, something that's kind of dedicated to sharing news about technology and open source topics and whatnot. And that might put us in kind of the best pool, initially at least, for where our messages will hit kind of like people who'd be interested in those topics. And then likewise, instances federate with each other. So they'll have, you know, other instances they share messages with. And so what we see, almost like the web rings of old, for anyone who remembers those days, you know, open source instances are usually, you know, or technology instances are interested in sharing news about these things with each other. So hopefully we could agree as a community on an instance that looks suitable to us. And, you know, one of them I identified is where like the Fedora project is, and Arch Linux and whatnot. So, you know, probably that's a nice place for us to look at in terms of, you know, a community we could be part of. And then hopefully people who, like Jamie's saying, would be interested in the messaging, would be interested in sharing and communicating with us.
Yeah, I'm totally +1 to doing it in both places. Mike, if you can think about which server you'd like to be on, there's a couple of them. Red Hat has a couple of other projects that are on, I think, FOSDEM, but I'll have to take a peek, and we probably should be on the same server rather than one of my more esoterically fun ones like Hackaderm.io. But I would love it if you guys could set up.
Yeah, so in that document that Jamie shared, and thank you, Diane and Jack, for adding your handles here. I'm adding you to my follow list now. that link that Jamie shared in the chat here, and I guess we could put it in the notes too. I do have a couple recommendations at the end for top servers we should probably look at, and Fostodon was one of the ones that I agree with you, Diane. I think it's probably a good place for us to consider. Hackaderm is another one that I think is good to consider as well, but ultimately, I think the community should probably decide, and we should agree as a community where we want to be.
Excellent. Very cool. So we'll move. We're not going to have Elmigo doing all of this by himself. So there will be people volunteering to help out and to sort of lead the way technically. He did a great amount of foundational work. Very much appreciate that. But obviously he has a lot of other responsibilities and is doing other stuff for the community. So we want to make sure that we share the love, as it were, in terms of getting that done. Excellent. Let's see. Are we ready to talk about operators in ARM, or do we want to wait still, Luigi?
I think let's go ahead anyway and start on the operators.
Okay.
And hopefully.
Regrettably, Christian isn't here, which is really the person we would want to.
Yeah. He's taken, I think, a week's PTO. So
yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Luigi. Go ahead.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
Well, basically, what it is the discussion came out of the community meeting, the community development meeting, that like we sort of want to fish or cut bait on the operator situation. Like, if there's going to be an operator catalog supported by Red Hat, great, let's move forward with that. If there isn't, then the community might want to just tackle that ourselves or do something, because there's that would be our edge, number one, as a project, is having operators and maintaining our own operators and whatnot, and having stuff that's currently missing but is in OCP, right? So that's sort of the edge that we would have in getting folks over to OKD. The other aspect of it is that we've kind of been spinning our gears and waiting on this for a long time, and we're not getting clear communication from Red Hat on, like, is this moving forward or not in terms of the operator catalog. And that's not to condemn anyone or anything like that. There's a lot of competing priorities. It's just at some point we have to do something, was the general sense of it. And Brian is particularly passionate about this because he really thinks that, and I agree with him, that this is, it really is going to affect adoption of OKD, because that's where the action is, right?
So I think to your point then, Jamie, it's maybe getting consensus from the community. Do we continue on a path where we maintain our own community version of a catalog for OKD, or do we follow what Red Hat's doing, type of thing? I mean, I think that was one of the points that Brian wanted for us to mainly speak about and sort of get some consensus.
Well, there was an internal project to provide a OKD specific catalog, operator catalog, but it was brought up by Christian like last winter, I think it was like winter 2021 heading into 2022, and then it just never picked up steam. And so that's why I was kind of hoping that Christian would be here to let us know sort of what that status is of that internal effort.
How much effort would it be for us to do that, to create and maintain our own operator catalog? What are we talking about?
So, well, we're talking about making sure that we have builds of the operators that we want to include, and maybe following a Fedora-esque maintainer system of, okay, these are the maintainers for this particular operator, just so that it's continuously updated. That's, it's somewhat, and then in having a package, or I shouldn't say a package, but a process in the build of inserting that catalog into the cluster configuration. Those are
Yeah.
the two things.
I think what we could ask Christian to do to see what, if any, work that we could leverage to do it ourselves. Like if there was somebody who had an internal project that has left the house, or has moved on to something else, but there's some code base or something that we could use as a starting point. But there's been a lot of turnover in the operator team itself, so I'm not sure. I think it's a question, like you say, for Christian, if he could do a tiny bit of research on what was actually done, if anything. And you know, depending on Red Hat, and this is said still as a Red Hatter, has not really proven successful for us.
Yeah, could I
And I
add
think,
something?
sorry, go Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce, then
Yeah.
Luigi.
Yeah, because there's several parts, some of which are fairly nominally straightforward. One is that you basically need a repo to host whatever operators you're doing. And without that, you have nowhere to publish them. Given that you have a repo to publish the operators, then it depends on the operator. And some of them probably would take a lot of discussion on the best way to proceed. So like with the Tecton operator, which is one of the fairly fundamental ones, there's a lot of different ways to proceed. And if you want to mirror what OCP is doing with the, I guess with the, well, what do you do about the branding is an issue, but resolving that, the Tecton people do have an OCP specific build that doesn't seem to get published anywhere. And, you know, but many of the essential operators are quite big. You know, you know, like for the one for getting serverless, Istio, all of these things, and they're also quite invasive and can really take your system down if you don't have it right, having taken my system down a couple of times. So I think that overall, to get to where OCP is would be a big effort, but to start would not be such a big effort. Like you can start with a tiny operator, get it published, get it so that it's consistent with the operator manager, and you know you can add it in as a test thing and so on and so on. So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think to that, obviously having a common repo for the community, then we would need a set of gatekeepers, because you could get some rogue person building a malicious operator that would destroy or gather information for himself or something. So there has to be some form of gatekeeping and some form of protecting that we can't just accept any operator that gets pushed into the community operator, that type of thing. And then obviously that standards are adhered to, all that. So there's a lot, and like the big one is again icons and branding. So there's actually quite a lot to discuss, and yeah, I
Right.
mean,
Well, a lot of that is stuff that Brian was very cognizant and passionate about, that needs to be discussed sort of in the community forum. But there are also technical issues on how you're making it happen, which is basically what I was talking about here. So I completely agree with you, Luigi, that these other things are critical. And we have a place to try and discuss that. And you know, I think the community side of the house is moving along that direction.
All right, any other thoughts?
Yes. If you could take the operator situation and put it down as a grant, what would it look like? What would be the cost of it? What would be the infrastructure needed? Open source is a big thing to contribute to the workforce and could be a great skill to pass on. So, if I could see it in those terms, then perhaps I could or just find a funding agency. I think it may fit in the workforce development things pretty easily. But I got to go searching for a grant that would, that would mirror the language that you would want, because the innovation, the automation, I think that's definitely workforce.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And the foundation of your point is quantifying the effort to do this, right? And I think that that's something that we're going to want to do at some point, is maybe talk to folks that are involved in building operators and say, okay, how long does it really, or, look at release stuff in repo, but it's probably best to actually talk to people who are maintaining operators and be like, how long does this really take you? What kind of pitfalls do you run into? How long does it really take for you to get this done and make sure that it's in the catalog without any issues? How many bug reports do you get from people using it on OCP or in OKD, things like that? I think we would benefit from quantifying that. It's a lot of work. I'd be happy to participate in that effort if someone wants to join me with that. But I think reaching out to some of the current maintainers of operators to gather some info so that we can quantify this effort is probably a good idea, right? Before we start rushing forward with our flag of starting our own or whatever, like let's know what we're really committing to in terms of effort.
Yeah, like building an operator from scratch. Our team have been involved in building 3 operators. So they're day 1 operators, so like external DNS. We did the node observability operator that is able to deploy eBPF scripts on nodes, and we did another one for I mentioned node observability. Yeah, so, and basically, so from scratch, doing those operators and then building them, fixing them, maintaining them, putting them into building the indexes, building the catalog, putting them into the catalog, and making sure that they are in the Red Hat marketplace is a lot of work. It's, I mean, we're talking 6 months worth of work for one operator type of thing. So, yeah, it's not easy. Let's just say it's not easy. But if we can, I mean, if we get a, if like Dwayne is saying, we get a grant and there is servers available for a repo or whatever, and people helping to handle the catalogs, then I think we'll be in good shape.
And I think you're right. Diane just brought up something interesting in chat. Diane, do you want to sort of just verbalize what you said in chat?
Well, first of all, I think that the Tecton operator is the one that we're all interested in at the moment, getting researched and documented how to build that. And I certainly am. So if we took one and narrowed in on that, figured out what it would take to build that ourselves, what the effort is currently to build it, do some documentation on it, document what you find. But I think, like for me, I'm always trying to, how do we drive more traffic and eyeballs to OKD.io? So I'm still been bugging Christian to get the Tecton pipelines up on Tecton Hub, or now Artifact Hub, because I think they're retiring Tecton Hub soon. So I'm curious if we could use that one, maybe Jamie and Benjamin, as the first research project to document what it takes to do that, and maybe do that one all the way through once we've documented it. And if it turns out to be hugely onerous, then maybe not, but that would be where I would spend my energy.
I think you're right. I've started in that path actually. So I joined the Tecton working groups, and so I got 20 million calendar invites because they have so many subgroups. And so Thursday is their operator subgroup meeting, and I'm going to attend that and see if I can garner some information. Dwayne, if you want, you and I can synchronize offline to share information and start looking at some of these operators. Elmiko suggested the Windows operator team, reaching out to them. Are you willing to do that, buddy? Do you have the time to do that?
I mean, I work pretty closely with some of them. I just know that like the Windows the Windows container driver, whatever it's called, whatever it is that allows you to run Windows nodes or whatever. We don't install that as part of the core OCP package. It's actually installed through the operator hub. So I know like they're very well versed in that, you know, how that packaging goes. So like I could reach out to Arvind or one of the other, you know, project leads there and see if maybe they could just come to one of our community or not community, come to this meeting.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, answer, like do a Q&A for us just to kind of give us an impression of what the entire cycle looks like or something. But yeah, I'll reach out and see if they have someone who could come join us.
All right, and we'll set up some tasks in the board for all of these, and then folks can report back to the respective issues that get generated. Anything else on? We've got about
I just wanted to say, not to complicate things too much, but I think another one that goes hand in hand with Tecton is the Argo CD. So if we could also get that one on board, I think if Argo CD with Tecton, you'd have a lot of people be interested. So I mean, maybe we could do that simultaneously, run in parallel, and see how far we can get. I don't know, as a suggestion.
No, I think that's great. I think that's fantastic.
I think a lot of people would also be interested in the logging operator, since it used to be part of OKD, but then with I think 4.8 it was moved out. So yeah, I think that would be a good candidate that a lot of people might be interested in, and I can contribute some resources to that.
All right, let's do that. I'll reach out for the GitOps one. I'll reach out for that, and then I'll attend the Tecton meeting on Thursday. Elmiko, you'll do Windows. Jack, reach out to find out about logging operator. That gives us 4, right? I think I can
hit up a guy named Christian for Argo CD. He talks a lot about
that's who I was going to talk to as well, Christian Hernandez. So yeah, for sure. All right, so I think 4 is good. Let's limit it to 4. Let's not go any more, because we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. But let's synchronize our watches and meet back here with our results, right?
Can I ask one more question, just because I think it might be a naive question? Bruce brought up, where would we put it, like creating a repo or something like that?
Yeah.
Would we also put it in, like have OKD built operators in Artifact Hub, or is that redundant? Like, if we built them, would we just put them in a catalog that we put in on the OKD repo and publicized on our site? Like, what would the relationship be to the operators that are in Artifact Hub? I'm just trying to parse that out in my head. Anyone?
That's a good question.
Because we could get more publicity. And this is what Diane's mantra right now is, how do we get more adoption? If we put things in Artifact Hub and conjoined it with the rest of the universe, as long as we did it in a way that did not confuse it with OCP operators, so that people weren't pulling them down. So the naming convention is important here, but we probably still need a repo to put all of the stuff in. So Brian, you're probably right about, not Brian, Bruce, sorry, your name is covered up and I know who you are for years. But I think also keep that in the back of mind. Other thing I would keep that in mind when you're going off and doing this research, if there's a way like the Windows team can be cajoled into building it for us, that use them, like, you know, just say, we want to learn how to build it ourselves, but if this is just an easy thing for you to add, please do, and put it here in the repo, and we'll manage getting it out there in Artifact Hub or wherever we want to put it. But I'm curious what people think, if you're pulling stuff from Artifact Hub now on CNCF or not. And it doesn't, not a lot of vociferousness here. So I'm thinking Artifact Hub might not be where you're getting your
Probably not. I think most folks are just getting it getting stuff directly from within OCP or OKD, you know, and not really thinking about where the source of the operator is from. You know, because for things like the Tecton one, you have to actually go to get different components. Like there's actually a repo with the Red Hat tasks. It's completely separate repo with the tasks that are the Red Hat specific ones for Tecton. So you can't really just go to Artifact Hub to get those. All right, we have 10 minutes left. I do want to be respectful to the other topic that I promised I would get to at this meeting, which is the where are we at here? To make sure I have all of these covered. Oh, ARM support, right? ARM support. So does anyone know anything about the ARM support? We don't have Christian. We don't have anyone else.
No, we don't have Alessandro was unfortunately held up in another meeting. So maybe we could bring it up in the next meeting.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe. And that's something that I'll have to make sure I update the threads, because we had people asking in discussion in the repo and in the Slack channel about status. And I said that I would ask. So, okay. So we will postpone that to 2 weeks to the next technical meeting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And next up, Jack, do you want to talk about what you added here to the agenda?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to mention it. So as in December, as part of this C Group V2 discussion, we also mentioned that like some of the docs are inconsistent between OCP and OKD, and because we're just always copying them over, it's like there are just sometimes some things there that don't apply to OKD. So I was told to open this issue in the OpenShift docs repo, which I did, but it didn't really move anywhere. So I just wanted to kind of ask what's the best way that we can take ownership of our documentation, like the documentation that's hosted on docs.okd.io, without just always blatantly copying from the OpenShift docs. Like what's kind of the best process? So I tried the process that I was told, but it didn't really work out that well. And as far as I can see, we also just have one contact person who's kind of responsible for taking care of OKD. And of course, like people are busy and people have other priorities. So I totally understand. It's more of a general question. How can we take ownership of our docs that are in the end hosted on our website?
Elmiko.
Yeah, I've been looking at that issue that Jack linked, and looking at the PR that Michael Burke made, kind of like responding to it, or I guess relating to it. I think if we're gonna stick with the point that our docs start as OCP product docs, and then like Jack said, they get copied and we kind of transform them into the OKD docs, we probably need to look into what they're using in those files to gate between the OKD content and the OCP content. And then I imagine that we could propose PRs to the source of the docs, as long as we respect those rules about how we gate the OKD content. That for now, I imagine that's probably the path we would want to take if we actually want to like contribute changes and say, no, this is wrong for OKD. We need to learn a little more about how they're doing that switching in the upstream docs. And then I think they would probably accept patches from us as long as we follow that format.
Okay, so you say they would probably accept patches, so they would probably accept patches from you or also from me? So
well, I mean, yeah, they would definitely accept patches from me, but I have a feeling, and I would need to confirm this, so I need to check with my docs contacts. But if we follow what they're doing and we don't touch the OCP content, but we use, I think they have like if-else statements in there for where they want to put in the OKD content. If we're only adding OKD content, I think that yes, you could propose a change, and as long as it follows the guidelines and you've kind of signed whatever CLAs or whatever we have, that it could be accepted. But I need to confirm that, so don't take my word as gospel here. I need to talk to my docs contacts.
All right, thanks.
You're muted.
I realize that's a less than ideal response to this. But all we have right now is Michael Burke. Michael has not been able to make it to any meetings in like the past 2 months, I think it is. He's just been exceptionally busy. And so as an alternative or as a temporary solution, we can do an FAQ and just try to promote that FAQ for people that want to know about the C Groups issue. And then parallel to that, we can work on getting more
Yeah,
clarity.
it was actually not specific about the C groups issue.
No, I
It's
understand,
just
but
it was
that's
just an example here, but
sure,
more in
but that
general.
is sure, but that is something that we probably need clarity on right now still. Anyway, so and
There's-
that can define a process like the alternate short-term process if it turns out that we still have to follow this sort of longer process of relying on Michael Burke, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's good to have a parallel process of quickly getting FAQs out or blog posts or whatever to address some of these things if we can't get it resolved quickly in product documentation.
Just one more thing back to Jack's kind of original question. And I think this is a question that the community probably needs to take up and decide. And that is that, like, you know, there's probably going to come a point where it's not going to be maintainable or scalable for us to keep contributing to the product documentation, even though we might use that as our source. And so I think this is something we do in OpenShift with respect to the Kubernetes sources. We probably want to consider some way that we could have carry patches that we keep for OKD only. And then we can start to develop our own methodology for how, you know, someone from the OKD community could propose a patch that needs to be carried on top of the OpenShift content. And then in that respect, we don't have to worry about committing to the OpenShift commercial repos. We can keep our content in the OKD repos with some automation that allows us to have carry patches that ride on top of, you know, the rebased content from upstream. And this is something we, like I said, we do in OpenShift now. So we could follow that pattern in OKD if it's something that the community thinks is like valuable for us.
And again, a lot of this relies on volunteers. We need more than the 7 people or 10 people that always show up at meetings, right? We've got to do some recruitment. And that's something I think in the coming year that needs to be prioritized. Speaking of which, that actually leads to our next topic. There's a list of prioritization. This is what the community development group came up with for prioritization. If anyone wants to add or change this, but I think this is at least from the community development standpoint, what the community development group wanted to prioritize for this coming year. Does anyone have anything that they would add or change from that list? Very last item, prioritization. For Q1 anyway of 2023.
Yeah, you might add ARM at the bottom.
ARM, yeah.
I would add adoption. And now
Okay. Someone started with an A there. Go ahead and put adoption. Yeah. All right.
What about infrastructure? Like, we've talked a lot about topics where if the OKD community ever got to the point where we had like operate first or our own infrastructure, we could start to host our own things, you know?
And that brings up something that I didn't want to talk about at this meeting without Christian here, but we actually did get sort of a templated issue created by the operate first folks about how are things going for you, whatnot. And so I think it was operate first. Yeah. And so that's something we're going to want to talk about, like how are things going and limited to, well, it could be Q1. So Miko's like, is this limited to Q1? Well, it could be even beyond that. So
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't. The infrastructure thing. The infrastructure stuff I think is a much bigger question. I didn't realize that was Q1. This is probably more like a Q4 2023 type
sure,
thing.
sure. All right. Well, we are at time. I want to be respectful of people's time. Any last minute thoughts before we end this meeting? All right. Well, thank you so much. As always, folks are really passionate, and that's very much appreciated. So community development meeting next week, same bat time, same bat channel. And then this meeting happens again in 2 weeks. All right. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye all.